Okay. Um, my first question is, could you tell me like what your position is at Ardmore and kind of an overview of what you do?
Okay. Um, I'm the executive director of Ardmore, and what we do as an agency.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like more so like your job as well.
Oh, okay. So our agency supports adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities in the community through residentially, through group homes and foster homes, and we support them in their own apartments or when they live with families.
Oh, okay.
Just help them. And we also have vocational supports too. So, trying to seek employment or volunteer activities in the community, and day habilitation programs.
Okay.
So, and I'm, as executive director, I just make sure that the programs are running and we've got funding for it and we can pay everybody when it needs paid. And
Yeah.
that's kind of my thing.
So how did you like know that you wanted to work with individuals with who are developmentally disabled? Was it just
Personally,
kind of yeah?
My degree is in electrical engineering, and
Oh, okay.
I went into sales because I stunk at electrical engineering. But that was back in the day. You didn't change your major; you just
Right.
finished your degree.
Oh gosh.
So I did sales for three or 4 years, and then I started volunteering at an agency that provided similar supports to what Ardmore does, and
Okay.
loved it.
Yeah.
So I quit my job and I started working, in this field.
Mhm.
And I just liked, I think that was the first opportunity I had to really advocate for people and, to make sure that, just to have an impact in someone's life.
Yeah.
And so I decided to do it.
Do you like what you do then?
Yes.
That's
yes.
good.
Yeah, so I've been here for 28 years.
Oh my goodness. So I'm gonna say one word to you, and I would like you to tell me the first thing that comes to your mind when I say it.
Okay.
What do you feel about the word retard?
It's just a shame. I just feel it's a shame that people, any word that tries to separate people and make someone less than who they are and make someone less than who you are.
Yeah.
It's just it's very sad.
Does it affect you as a person, or like both inside and outside of work, or is it just kind of it affects you more so just in when you're working?
I think it affects all of us all the time. Like with when the girls at school, or that would be, they used to say it would be the S word would be the same thing, and people thought they meant shit, but they meant stupid.
Yeah.
That
Right.
was the S word for us, because anything that when we, and it's not just because of someone's capacity or just, it could be race, it could be any of those words that
Right.
that divide us are just so damaging
Right.
to our community.
So, in relation to this company, do you talk to your workers about the use of this word? Almost like how they should or shouldn't, or what context they should use it in?
Right from the beginning, we talk about it, because especially the fact that we're getting kind of closer and closer to paying minimum wage
Right.
for folks to work here. It's something that is just a part of their vocabulary,
Right.
and they don't think about it. And so some of that initial training talks a lot about that, and we have a pretty powerful video that shows people like at the Apple Creek Developmental Center, or those kinds of places that used to people thought were necessary,
Yeah,
and
right.
separating. And so we do. But it's interesting now that you say that. I just went through our annual training, and I don't remember seeing a specific slide about that anymore.
Right.
So, well, we'll have to look at that. So I know
Yeah.
they talk about that sensitivity stuff in the beginning. But,
Right.
yeah.
Have you had like any problems with like individuals? Like you don't have to be specific about like using the word and then it like being reported. or like something that you had to deal with like on the executive side of things?
Not with that.
Okay.
Not with that.
Okay.
I have not.
Have any of like the clients personally said anything about the word just affecting them, even if it wasn't like a worker saying it, or any that you know of?
I do remember a woman named Becky, telling me how that she remembers kids in school singling her out like that, and she's the woman who's my age, in her 50s now, so she would have been in her 40s, and for that to still have an impact, and similar to, I'm sure when people are singled out because they're obese or any of those other things, that wound just stays with you for so long. And so it's like you have enough battles that you have to fight in this life without having to add that kind of damage, and have to recover from. So
So what do you think when people use the phrases like "that's retarded" or "you're a retard"? How do you think that affects people personally? I mean, I know you kind of like answered that, but I guess more so, like, what do people mean to come across as? Because I know they say like "you're retarded" or "you're a retard," but do they actually mean someone who like comparing to someone who's developmentally disabled, or?
And they right, and
I mean?
they do it unthinking.
Right.
They do, and that's part of what that sensitivity training is when they come in, is that they do it. And I know the girls, when my daughters were younger, they would be real sensitive to that, and they'd go, "Do you really want to say it that way?" I mean, they just kind of bring some note to it, and then the person realizes what they said. And, like,
it's like,
no.
oh wow, maybe that is offensive, or
right.
Like that.
So most of the time, people can change that if they just bring attention to it.
Right.
Because they aren't specifically always targeting a particular individual with a disability.
Right.
They're just doing that awful.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like on their tongue, like rolls off their tongue. So.
Yeah.
How do you see this word now as opposed to when it was used 10 years ago? Do you think it's like evolved?
Interesting, because we have a clinical psychologist on our board of directors, and he gets almost worked up that we lost sight of some of the clinical diagnosis,
right?
And and so he still wants that on his DSM. What is it now? 5, 6? I don't even know what it is now, but he'll talk about that, and he'll say, you just have this spectrum or all this other stuff, and you need to have that MR diagnosis, and so you can get the. So it's interesting because he thinks of it in the clinical aspect of still needing to state, that's happening.
Yeah.
Or that's what the diagnosis is. What was your question?
Just how the word has like evolved from 10 years ago. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, when he thinks of it, he found it helpful as a diagnosis to then get the person's services and stuff like that.
Right.
But it really isn't. Gosh, when did Summit County finally took MR out of their...
That's another question,
it really wasn't that long ago until we finally did Summit DD.
Yeah, because it was MRDD.
Yeah. So some of it's, you just don't even... Because we would just say CSB MRDD.
Right.
You don't
and it was
think
just
about it.
You don't think what it actually means.
Right.
So what are other words that people can use to describe those who are developmentally disabled?
And I'm not up on the jargon. I'm not. We choose developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities, but there's so much more ability language where you're making it more of a positive. But sometimes I think people can get confused then as to what your actual services are if you get too into that.
Right. Yeah.
Verb, socialese talk.
Right.
So I know that there's lots of other stuff But I still want people to be really clear on the services that we provide as an agency.
Right.
So we've chosen to use still use the disabilities in our words.
So they actually can
know what
distinguish,
they're getting.
Right? So do you think the word retard signifies something greater than saying that we need to make a change in our society about how we label individuals, just in general, even if it's not individuals who are disabled or, like you said, like individuals who are obese or whatnot.
Right. And I think, we grow up and we start out by learning about ourselves by differentiating ourselves from someone else. That's kind of how we learn who we are, is by saying who we are not.
Yeah.
I just think it shows when people still do that after they're not young anymore.
Yeah.
That it shows a marked lack of maturity and ability to do what's right for the community and to be a part of the community. But it's interesting in Akron. There's been so much that's happening with building community that I kind of have some hope that it won't be like that. But then you have it, election time, and so now we hear all the rhetoric about even the refugees. Oh well, no, you're all this. If you're a refugee, then that means you're Muslim or whatever. And, so I think there's always going to be that tendency. There's just always going to be that.
Right.
And we just have to keep fighting it in our own little
area
world. Just going no.
Yeah. So in 2012, Ann Coulter, a political commentator, used Twitter to call Barack Obama a retard. After Barack Obama addressed this tweet saying that the word shouldn't be used, Coulter defended the tweet saying, Look, no one would refer to a Down syndrome child, someone with an actual mental handicap, by saying retard. Where do you think the words idiot and moron come from? These were all technological terms at one time, and retard has just meant loser for the past 30 years. And that was from a Huffington Post article in 2012. So what's your reaction to that?
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
She's not, I don't find her very impressive anyway. She loves to get reactionary and get things going. But, what you had mentioned before, I don't know that people mean, okay, yes, this is, but it still is derogatory rather than accepting what that person's saying. And you can disagree with it, but the fact that you have to call them something is ridiculous. So no, it isn't just something that isn't associated still with an individual with, Down syndrome or any other disability. It's still associated with that. You're still saying that person's less than because they believe this. Yeah. Or because they are this. Or because, so it's still just a ridiculous thing.
Okay. So, along with this, Coulter used the description Down syndrome child instead of saying a child with Down syndrome. Do you think that this is an automatic label for individuals with disabilities to almost label them directly as just putting a label on them and not just totally wiping away their personality and their individual characteristics?
Absolutely. And we do that internally in the system too, to be honest.
Yeah.
We tend to categorize or group still, and it's wrong, and you get. So what was your original question?
So, labeling someone as a person, taking away their characteristics and just saying a Down syndrome person, instead of saying an individual who has Down syndrome or has.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And that's that same, someone who has a physical disability versus, a cripple or whatever, it is, it's important that we make the effort to always do that. And so that you're not, labeling that.
Yeah.
Because I look back some of the stuff I wrote years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and we just had a horrible tendency to do
Right.
that.
Right.
And it's worth the extra efforts to make
Yeah.
sure you're never labeling someone regardless of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, my last question is: do you think overall, as a society, this is still something that we need to work on? Changing
Look
it?
where we are.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's something that we always have to be conscious of and make an effort of, and that we do definitely have to always still work on. I think it's better, in looking at. We're making a real push for making sure we're integrated more into the community, and it was surprising. We opened a group home, and there was still some neighborhood concerns. But it was interesting because when we had the meeting to help them understand what we were doing, they went, "Oh, we just thought you were going to be, bring in those crazy people," or, so they were still labeling people. It just didn't happen to be our group.
Right. Right.
So I think that even though we weren't specifically an MH agency, that we were dealing with people with other disabilities, we still had to preach that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There could be people that have mental health problems.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely still an issue, but I think whereas before it might have gone to court. Like years ago, it used to go to court, and now it isn't. It just means now it's more of a neighborhood meeting, and I think it stops a lot earlier.
Yeah.
So, that is a good thing that, we're progressing.
Right.
We definitely are.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of education that needs to happen for folks.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Sure.
letting me interview you. I really appreciate it.
It was good to see you.
Yeah.